The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Westbrook High School as Dr. Thomas Reynolds pulled his 10-year-old sedan into an empty spot. He straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and gathered the stack of papers on the passenger seat. Today marked his first day as the new advanced placement physics teacher, and despite his 15 years of experience, he felt the familiar flutter of first-day nerves. Dr. Reynolds had left his research position at the National Science Foundation to pursue his true passion, teaching young minds. With a PhD from MIT and numerous published papers in prestigious journals, he was overqualified for a high school teaching position. But after years in research, he yearned to make a more direct impact on the next generation of scientists. As he walked toward the main entrance, he noticed a few curious glances from students arriving for the first day of school. He smiled warmly at them, but most quickly looked away. The weight of being the only black teacher in the science department wasn't lost on him, but he had faced similar situations throughout his academic career. Principal Chen had been enthusiastic when hiring him 3 weeks ago. "Your credentials are extraordinary, Dr. Reynolds," she had said, beaming. "We're lucky to have someone with your background join our faculty." Her genuine welcome had reassured him that he'd made the right choice. He found his way to the teacher's lounge, where a preterm faculty meeting was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. The room buzzed with conversation as teachers caught up after summer break. When he entered, the buzz didn't quite stop, but it definitely softened. A few heads turned his way, expressions ranging from curious to surprised to something else he couldn't quite name. "You must be the new custodian," said a voice to his right. A middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair extended his hand. "I'm Bill Thompson, head of the English department." Dr. Reynolds kept his expression neutral as he shook the man's hand. "Actually, I'm Dr. Thomas Reynolds, the new AP physics teacher." Thompson's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, I'm sorry about that. We weren't expecting." He trailed off, clearly flustered. "No problem," Dr. Reynolds replied smoothly, having navigated similar assumptions many times before. First days are always confusing. A woman with short blonde hair approached them. "Did I hear correctly? You're teaching AP Physics?" Her tone suggested she might have misheard. "That's right, Dr. Thomas Reynolds." He extended his hand. "Patricia Winters, Chemistry." Her handshake was brief. "I wasn't aware the position had been filled. What university did you say you attended?" "MIT for my doctorate. Howard for undergrad," he replied, keeping his tone light despite the obvious skepticism in her eyes. "MIT?" Another teacher joined their circle. "That's impressive. What brings you to high school teaching? Couldn't find a position at a university?" There was an edge to his question that suggested teaching high school was somehow a step down. Dr. Reynolds had prepared for questions like these. "Actually, I left my research position at the National Science Foundation specifically to teach. I believe in catching scientific minds early." "Well, that's noble," Patricia said, exchanging a glance with the other teacher that Dr. Reynolds didn't miss. "Our students can be challenging, especially in advanced courses. Many of them come from privileged backgrounds and can be resistant to new teaching methods." What she wasn't saying was clear. They might not respond well to a black teacher. "I'm looking forward to the challenge," Dr. Reynolds replied. Principal Chen entered the lounge, saving him from further interrogation. "Good morning, everyone. Please take your seats. We have a lot to cover before the students arrive tomorrow." During the meeting, Dr. Reynolds noticed several teachers whispering when Principal Chen introduced him and highlighted his impressive background. He caught fragments of their comments. "Affirmative action hire, lowering standards, won't last a semester." He kept his expression neutral, focusing on taking notes about school policies and upcoming events. This wasn't the first time he'd encountered such attitudes, and he doubted it would be the last. When the meeting shifted to department discussions, he followed the science faculty to a smaller classroom. The science department head, Dr. Howard Miller, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, barely acknowledged him as the 6 science teachers gathered around a table. "Let's discuss the curriculum changes for this year," Miller began, not bothering to invite Dr. Reynolds to introduce himself to the group. When Dr. Reynolds raised his hand to offer a suggestion about integrating more hands-on lab work, Miller cut him off. We've been using this curriculum for 8 years with excellent results. Our AP pass rates are above the national average. If it's not broken, why fix it? I've had success with a more interactive approach, Dr. Reynolds explained. Students retain concepts better when they, perhaps at your previous schools, interrupted Patricia. But our students respond well to traditional methods. They need structure and discipline. The message was clear. We don't want your ideas here. After the department meeting, Dr. Reynolds made his way to his assigned classroom. It was smaller than he'd expected, with outdated equipment and textbooks that were at least a decade old. The lab section had 4 workstations, 2 of which had out-of-order signs taped to them. He set down his materials and began unpacking the demonstration equipment he had brought from home. Tomorrow, he planned to show the students a simple but engaging experiment involving magnetic fields and electrical currents, something to spark their interest on the first day. As he worked, he heard voices in the hallway. "Can you believe they hired him for AP Physics?" A woman's voice, Patricia's. "I give him a month," replied a male voice he didn't recognize. "Those rich kids' parents will have a fit when they see who's teaching their precious college-bound children." "Chen's just trying to check diversity boxes for the school board," Patricia said. "He probably looks good on paper, but theory and practice are very different things." Their footsteps faded as they moved down the hall, unaware that he had heard every word. Dr. Reynolds sat down at his desk, suddenly feeling the weight of not just a new job, but the burden of proving himself yet again. He'd faced skepticism throughout his career, from undergrad to his PhD program to his research position. Each time he'd let his work speak for itself. This would be no different. He looked at the family photo on his desk, his wife Lisa, a pediatrician, and their 2 teenage daughters. They had moved across 3 states for this opportunity, believing in his vision of inspiring young scientists. His older daughter had asked him why he would leave a prestigious research position for a high school teaching job. "Because sometimes, one good teacher can change the direction of a person's entire life," he had told her. Now, in the quiet of his classroom, he wondered if he'd made the right choice. The stakes felt even higher knowing that for many of his students, he might be the first black teacher they'd ever had, especially in an advanced science course. He pulled out his lesson plans and began reviewing them, making adjustments based on what he'd learned about the school's resources. If the faculty thought he would be easily discouraged, they were mistaken. He hadn't overcome obstacles throughout his education and career by giving up at the first sign of resistance. That evening, as he prepared to leave, Principal Chen stopped by his classroom. "Getting settled in, Dr. Reynolds?" "Yes, thank you," he replied, not mentioning the cold reception from his colleagues. She hesitated, then said, "I should warn you that we have a tradition here. New teachers present a sample lesson to the faculty and school board at tomorrow afternoon's welcome reception. It helps everyone get acquainted with new teaching styles." Dr. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "A tradition? It wasn't mentioned during the hiring process." Principal Chen looked uncomfortable. "It's somewhat informal, usually decided each year based on who's new." She didn't need to say that he was the only new teacher being asked to perform this demonstration. "I see," he said carefully. "How long should this sample lesson be?" "About 10 minutes. Just a taste of your teaching style." She smiled apologetically. "The board members are particularly interested in meeting you. Your credentials made quite an impression during the hiring process." After she left, Dr. Reynolds sat back down at his desk. This tradition was clearly a test, one designed to put him on the spot. He suspected none of the previous white teachers had been subjected to such scrutiny. He thought about the demonstration he had planned for his students tomorrow, a simple but effective illustration of electromagnetic principles. Perhaps with some modifications, it could serve as his sample lesson as well. As he drove home that evening, he formulated a plan. If they wanted a demonstration, he would give them one they wouldn't forget. He made a mental list of the additional equipment he would need to bring from his home lab. The doubts and whispers of his colleagues echoed in his mind, but he pushed them aside. Throughout his life, people had underestimated him, and each time, he had proven them wrong. Tomorrow would be no different. He smiled to himself as he thought about what awaited the faculty and board members who had so quickly judged him. They had no idea what was coming. The next day arrived with a buzz of excitement and anxiety that filled the hallways of Westbrook High. Dr. Reynolds had spent most of the night perfecting his demonstration for the afternoon faculty presentation. He'd barely slept, but adrenaline kept him sharp as he greeted his first class of AP Physics students. 24 pairs of eyes stared at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright suspicion when he walked into the classroom. A hush fell over the room as he placed his briefcase on the desk and wrote his name on the whiteboard. Dr. Thomas Reynolds, Ph.D. "Good morning," he said with a warm smile. "Welcome to AP Physics. I'm looking forward to an exciting year of discovery together. Aoe." Boy in the front row raised his hand immediately. "Excuse me, sir, but are you our substitute teacher?" Dr. Reynolds maintained his smile. "No, I'm your permanent AP Physics teacher for the year." The boy glanced at his classmates, confusion evident on his face. "But Mr. Wilson always teaches AP Physics. He has for like 7 years. Mr. Wilson accepted a position at another school over the summer," Dr. Reynolds explained patiently. "I'll be taking over the AP Physics program." A girl with straight brown hair and an expensive-looking watch spoke up without raising her hand. "My dad is on the school board, and he said our new teacher was from MIT. Are you really from MIT?" "Yes. I received my doctorate from MIT 15 years ago," he confirmed. "Before coming here, I was working at the National Science Foundation on quantum physics research." Whispers rippled through the classroom. The girl looked unconvinced. "Then why would you come teach at a high school?" It was a fair question, one that adults had asked him repeatedly since he'd made his decision. "Because teaching bright young minds is more rewarding than you might think," he answered honestly. "And because sometimes the right teacher at the right moment can change a student's entire future." The morning classes passed quickly. Despite the initial skepticism, most students seemed willing to give him a chance once he began his introduction to physics concepts. He kept the first day light, focusing on sparking interest rather than diving into complex theories. As lunch approached, his nerves about the afternoon presentation began to build. He knew that unlike his students, the faculty and board members had already formed opinions about him. They weren't coming with open minds, they were coming to confirm their biases. Dr. Reynolds skipped lunch to set up his demonstration in the school auditorium. He carefully arranged copper coils, magnets, LED lights, and several other components that looked deceptively simple. From his briefcase, he removed a small device he'd built himself, a modified oscilloscope that would display wave patterns. On the large projection screen, Principal Chen stopped by as he was connecting the final wires. "Quite an elaborate setup," she observed, looking slightly concerned. "The board usually just expects a brief overview of teaching philosophy, perhaps a sample problem." "I believe in showing, not telling," Dr. Reynolds replied calmly. "Don't worry. I'll stay within the 10-minute limit." By 2:30 p.m., the auditorium had filled with faculty members and 7 people he assumed were school board members, dressed more formally than the teachers. They sat in the first 2 rows while other teachers filled in behind them. He noticed Patricia Winters and Howard Miller whispering to each other, occasionally glancing at his setup with skeptical expressions. Principal Chen stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you all for coming to our faculty welcome reception. As is tradition, we've asked our newest faculty member to present a brief demonstration of his teaching approach. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Thomas Reynolds, our new AP Physics teacher." The applause was polite but restrained as Dr. Reynolds took his place at the center of the stage. He could feel the weight of their judgment, the silent question hanging in the air. How did someone like him get this position? "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady and confident. "I'd like to share not just what I teach, but how I believe physics should be taught to engage today's students." He moved to his demonstration table. Physics isn't just equations on a blackboard. It's the language that describes our universe. from the smallest particles to the largest galaxies. The challenge is making that language accessible and exciting. Dr. Reynolds pressed a button on his laptop, and the lights in the auditorium dimmed slightly. Many students enter physics classes believing it's beyond their grasp. Too abstract, too mathematical. My approach bridges theory with tangible experience. He picked up a small copper coil and held it for everyone to see. This simple coil demonstrates Faraday's law of electromagnetic induction, but instead of just stating the law, let me show you its power. He placed the coil near a series of magnets arranged in a specific pattern. With a flick of a switch, LED lights began to glow in sequence, creating a wave pattern. On the projection screen behind him, the oscilloscope displayed corresponding wave functions. What you're seeing is the conversion of magnetic energy to electrical energy in real time, he explained. The pattern might seem random, but it follows precise mathematical principles. Dr. Reynolds pressed another button, and suddenly the lights began dancing in complex patterns while musical notes played in perfect harmony with the light show. The oscilloscope patterns grew more intricate, splitting into multiple wave functions that interacted with each other. Now we're observing wave interference patterns, the same principles that govern everything from sound waves to quantum particle behavior, he continued. Notice how changing one variable affects the entire system. He glanced at his watch. 5 minutes had passed. The faces in the audience had changed, skepticism giving way to curiosity, even fascination among some. He noticed one board member leaning forward in his seat, completely absorbed in the demonstration. But physics isn't just about observation. It's about prediction and application, Dr. Reynolds said. He turned to face the audience directly. I'd like a volunteer to help me demonstrate this concept. The room fell silent. After an uncomfortable moment, a young female teacher from the English department hesitantly raised her hand. Thank you, Dr. Reynolds said with a genuine smile. Please come up and stand right here. He positioned her next to the demonstration table. I'm going to give you this dial, he explained, handing her a small control knob connected to his setup. When I say now, please turn it to any position you choose. He stepped back to his laptop and pulled up what looked like a simple computer program, with various colored dots arranged in a circle. This program predicts the pattern that will appear on our light display based on quantum probability functions, he explained to the audience. Before my volunteer turns the dial, I'll run the simulation to show what should theoretically happen. He ran the program, and a complex pattern of light points appeared on the screen. This is what mathematics predicts should happen. Now let's see what actually happens in our physical system. He nodded to the volunteer. Please turn the dial to any position you choose. She turned the dial, and instantly the LED lights on. The demonstration table rearranged themselves into a pattern nearly identical to the one on the computer screen. Gasps came from several audience members. That's impossible, Howard Miller said audibly from the front row. There's no way to predict which way she would turn the dial. The position of the dial isn't what matters, Dr. Reynolds explained. What matters is understanding the underlying system so completely that you can predict how it will respond to any input. That's the power of truly understanding physics. He checked his watch again. 8 minutes had passed. Now for the final part of my demonstration, he said. What if we could not only predict but control these patterns at an even more fundamental level? He pressed another button on his laptop, and suddenly the lights began forming recognizable shapes. First a perfect circle, then a square, then a DNA double helix that rotated slowly in three-dimensional space, created entirely from the precisely controlled LED points. By understanding the mathematics behind wave functions and electromagnetic fields, we can manipulate them to create any pattern we desire, he explained. This is the same principle that allows MRI machines to create images of our bodies, or quantum computers to process information. The display shifted again, now showing a model of an atom with electrons orbiting the nucleus, all created from the dancing lights. This is why I left research to teach, Dr. Reynolds said, his voice passionate. Because when students truly understand these principles, not just memorize equations for a test, they gain the power to change our world. Every smartphone, every computer, Every medical imaging device exists because someone understood these principles and saw new possibilities. Exactly 9 minutes and 14 seconds into his presentation, Dr. Reynolds pressed a final button. The lights on his demonstration table suddenly expanded, projecting a holographic-like display that filled the front of the auditorium. It showed the night sky, with constellations highlighted and planets moving in their orbits, all created from his seemingly simple tabletop setup. "Physics isn't just a subject to study," he said as the stars seemed to swirl around the room. "It's the key to unlocking the universe itself, and every student, regardless of their background, deserves the chance to hold that key." He turned off the display and the regular lights came back on. The auditorium remained silent for several seconds, then erupted in applause, not the polite, obligatory kind from earlier, but genuine, enthusiastic applause. Dr. Reynolds noticed Patricia Winter staring at him with her mouth slightly open. Howard Meal was whispering urgently to the board member next to him. Principal Chen was beaming from the side of the stage. One of the board members, an older gentleman with silver hair, stood up and approached the stage. "Dr. Reynolds, that was extraordinary. I've never seen physics presented so magically yet scientifically sound. Where did you learn to create such demonstrations?" "I developed these techniques over years of working with students who believed science wasn't for them," Dr. Reynolds replied. "Once you show them that physics isn't abstract, that it's the reality we live in every day, their perspective changes." "And all of this was built by you?" the board member asked, gesturing to the demonstration setup. "Yes, sir. Most of it from commonly available components." The man turned to his fellow board members. "I think we need to reconsider the budget for the science department, particularly AP Physics. Dr. Reynolds clearly has methods that could revolutionize how we teach science at Westbrook." Principal Chen stepped forward. "Thank you, Dr. Reynolds, for that remarkable demonstration. I believe our reception will continue in the cafeteria with refreshments, giving everyone a chance to speak with our new faculty members." As people began filing out of the auditorium, several teachers approached Dr. Reynolds with questions about his demonstration. Even Patricia Winters eventually made her way to him. "That was unexpected," she said, still looking slightly stunned. "Where did you teach before coming here?" "Various places," he replied. "Most recently at a community college in Baltimore, but I've also taught at summer programs for underprivileged students interested in STEM." She nodded slowly. "Your approach is very different from what we're used to here." "Different can be good," he said with a gentle smile. "Physics hasn't changed, but how we teach it must evolve with each generation of students." As he packed up his equipment, Dr. Reynolds felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He hadn't just survived his first day. He'd changed the conversation. They had belittled him, underestimated him, questioned his qualifications. But in just 9 minutes and 14 seconds, everything had changed. This was only the beginning. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation as faculty members and school board officials mingled over coffee and pastries. Dr. Reynolds stood near his demonstration table, which he had relocated to the side of the room at Principal Chen's request. "People will want a closer look," she had explained, her eyes still bright with excitement from his presentation. She wasn't wrong. A small crowd had gathered around him, asking questions about the equipment and the principles behind his demonstration. The board member with silver hair, who had introduced himself as Robert Blackwell, head of the school board, hadn't left his side. "You know, Dr. Reynolds," Blackwell said, examining the copper coil apparatus, "I've sat through 15 years of these new teacher presentations, and I've never seen anything like what you just showed us." "Thank you, sir," Dr. Reynolds replied. "I believe that learning should be an experience, not just a transfer of information." "Exactly," Blackwell agreed enthusiastically. "My grandson is always on his phone, playing those games with all the lights and sounds. If science class could capture even a fraction of that engagement." He shook his head in wonder. "Do you think you could implement this approach across all your classes?" "That's my intention," Dr. Reynolds confirmed. "Though I'll need to upgrade some of the lab equipment. The current setup is—" He searched for a diplomatic word. Vintage. Blackwell laughed. That's one way to put it. Our budget has been tight, but after what I just saw, I think we can find some funds for the science department. From across the room, Dr. Reynolds noticed Howard Miller watching their conversation with a tight expression. The department head had yet to approach him after the demonstration. A young woman who had introduced herself as a biology teacher touched one of the LED components gently. Did you really build all this yourself? Most of it, Dr. Reynolds nodded. Some parts were repurposed from old electronics, others I machined in my home workshop. And you could teach our students to build something like this? She asked, clearly impressed. By the end of the year, yes. Not individually, but as group projects. It teaches more than just physics. It shows them engineering principles, electronics, even a bit of computer programming. Principal Chen approached with a tray of coffee cups. Dr. Reynolds, I've been telling the board about your background at the National Science Foundation. Perhaps you could share more about how that experience informs your teaching philosophy? Recognized her question for what it was, an invitation to reveal more of his credentials to those who had doubted him. 9 minutes and 14 seconds had gotten their attention, but now he had the opportunity to cement their respect. Of course, he said, accepting a cup of coffee. At the NSF, I worked on projects exploring quantum computing applications. Fascinating work. But I kept noticing a pattern in our hiring processes. We had plenty of applicants with perfect grades and test scores, but many lacked creative problem-solving skills or the ability to translate theoretical knowledge to practical applications. He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. I traced this gap back to how science is taught in most schools, as a series of facts and formulas to memorize rather than as a method of exploration and discovery. I realized that if I wanted to see change in my field, I needed to help create it at the source. A tall man in a navy suit who had introduced himself as another board member nodded thoughtfully. So you left a prestigious research position to teach high school? That's quite a career change. Some saw it that way, Dr. Reynolds acknowledged. But I see it as an investment in the future of science. Every year, thousands of bright minds turn away from STEM fields because they're taught in ways that feel inaccessible or irrelevant. I want to change that narrative. And you've had success with this approach before? Asked another board member, a woman with gray-streaked hair who had been quietly listening. Yes, Dr. Reynolds replied, setting down his coffee cup. At my previous positions, I implemented similar methods, though on a smaller scale due to resource limitations. Let me show you some data. He pulled a tablet from his briefcase and opened a presentation. The small crowd leaned in as he displayed a series of graphs. These charts show student outcomes before and after implementing my teaching methods, he explained. The blue bars represent traditional teaching approaches, and the orange represents my interactive methodology. The difference was striking. Test scores, course completion rates, and continued enrollment in advanced science courses all showed significant improvements, with the orange bars towering over the blue ones. Most notably, he continued, swiping to a new slide. Look at these demographic breakdowns. Students from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in STEM fields showed the most dramatic improvements. In this school in Baltimore, we went from having 3 minority students in AP Physics to 27 in just 2 years. Robert Blackwell's eyebrows shot up. That's more than a 700% increase. Yes, sir. And of those 27 students, 23 went on to pursue STEM majors in college, with over half receiving significant scholarships. Principal Chen beamed. This is exactly why we were so excited to bring Dr. Reynolds to Westbrook. Our district has been trying to increase diversity in advanced courses for years with limited success. The key is making science feel accessible and relevant to all students, Dr. Reynolds explained. Many young people, especially those from underrepresented groups, don't see themselves reflected in scientific fields. They've internalized the message that science isn't for people like them. He swiped to another slide showing a group of students proudly displaying projects similar to his demonstration. When students create something with their own hands, something that works because they've applied scientific principles correctly, it changes how they see themselves and their potential. The biology teacher was nodding enthusiastically, I've noticed the same thing in my classes. The hands-on labs always generate the most engagement. Dr. Reynolds smiled at her. Exactly. And when we connect these activities to real-world applications and potential careers, students start to envision futures they might never have considered. He showed one final slide, a chart tracking the long-term outcomes of his former students. 4 years after implementing these methods at my previous school, we saw a 215% increase in students pursuing STEM degrees, a 180% increase in science, scholarship recipients, and most importantly, a complete elimination of the racial and gender gaps in advanced science course enrollment. The crowd had grown larger as he spoke. Even teachers who hadn't approached him earlier were now listening intently. He noticed Patricia Winters hovering at the edge of the group, her expression thoughtful. "Dr. Reynolds," called a voice from the back of the crowd. Howard Miller pushed his way forward, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "These results are impressive if accurate, but Westbrook isn't an inner-city school. Our students are already high achievers. How do you know your methods will work in our environment?" The crowd fell silent, sensing the challenge in Miller's tone. Dr. Reynolds met his gaze steadily. "Excellence knows no zip code, Dr. Miller. High-achieving students benefit from engaging teaching methods just as much as struggling ones, sometimes more because they're often bored by tradition. Novel approaches that don't challenge their creativity." He turned back to his tablet and opened a different file. "This data comes from a summer program I ran for gifted students from across the country. Using the same methods, we saw significant improvements in conceptual understanding, problem-solving abilities, and most notably, in students' self-reported interest in pursuing physics at the university level." Miller frowned. "Summer programs are different from structured classroom environments with standardized testing requirements." "You're absolutely right," Dr. Reynolds agreed, surprising Miller. "That's why I've already reviewed Westbrook's testing requirements and adjusted my curriculum to ensure all necessary content is covered. The difference is in how that content is delivered and applied." He pulled up the official AP Physics curriculum on his tablet. "Every concept required by the College Board is integrated into my teaching plan. The demonstrations and projects aren't replacing traditional learning. They're enhancing it by providing context and practical application." Robert Blackwell clapped his hands together. "Well, I'm convinced. Dr. Reynolds, I'd like you to present your approach at our next district-wide professional development day. Teachers across all our schools could benefit from your insights." "Principal." Chen nodded enthusiastically. "An excellent idea, and perhaps we should consider expanding the science budget to support Dr. Reynolds' methods. The results speak for themselves." Dr. Reynolds could see Miller's face tightening at this development. The department head had likely expected his challenge, to expose flaws in the new teacher's approach, not to result in additional support and recognition. "I'd be happy to share my methods with other teachers," Dr. Reynolds said. "In fact, collaboration is key to successful implementation. Each subject area can adapt these principles to their specific content." As the conversation continued, a student tentatively approached the group. It was a young black girl Dr. Reynolds recognized from his fourth period class. "Excuse me, Dr. Reynolds," she said quietly. "I was wondering if I could ask you something about the demonstration you showed us in class today." He turned to her with a warm smile. "Of course. Everyone, please excuse me for a moment." He stepped away from the crowd with the student, giving her his full attention. "What's your question?" "Well," she began hesitantly, "you mentioned that we'd be doing group projects later in the year, similar to your demonstration. I was wondering, do you think someone like me could really build something like that?" The question hit him hard, not because it was unexpected, but because it so perfectly illustrated what he'd been trying to explain to the faculty. Here was a bright young woman doubting her abilities not because of any objective measure, but because of the messages society had sent her about who belongs in science. "Absolutely," he said firmly. "In fact, I have no doubt that with proper guidance you could design something even more impressive. Science isn't about who you are. It's about curiosity, persistence, and creative thinking. From what I saw in class today, you have all three in abundance." Her face lit up with a mixture of surprise and hope. Really? Because I've always liked science, but my counselor suggested I focus on humanities instead. She said it would be easier. Dr. Reynolds felt a familiar surge of determination. This was exactly why he'd left his research position, to reach students like her before they were directed away from paths they might excel in. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Tanya," she replied. "Well, Tanya, I'd like to make you a promise. By the end of this year, you'll not only understand physics at a level that will impress any college admissions officer, but you'll also have built something with your own hands that demonstrates that understanding. Something you can be proud of," she smiled shyly. "I'd like that." "Good. And I want you to do something for me in return." "What's that?" "Never let anyone tell you what you can or can't achieve based on anything other than your willingness to work for it." As Tanya walked away with a new confidence in her step, Dr. Reynolds turned back to find Principal Chen watching the interaction with approval. "That," she said quietly, "is exactly why I fought so hard to bring you to Westbrook." "Fought?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "Let's just say not everyone on the hiring committee was initially enthusiastic about bringing in someone with unconventional ideas. There were concerns that your methods wouldn't align with our traditional approach. And now?" She smiled. "And now I suspect most of them are wondering why they ever doubted. Your demonstration wasn't just about physics, Dr. Reynolds. It was about possibility, about showing what education can be when we move beyond our preconceptions and limitations." As the reception began to wind down, Dr. Reynolds found himself surrounded by teachers from various departments, all eager to discuss how his approach might be adapted for their subjects. Even Patricia Winters eventually approached him. "I may have been hasty in my assessment," she admitted with some difficulty. "Your methods are unorthodox, but I can't argue with your results." "Thank you," he replied sincerely. "I hope we can collaborate this year. I believe science departments are strongest when they work together." She nodded stiffly, not quite ready for full collegiality, but at least open to professional respect. As Dr. Reynolds packed up his demonstration materials, he reflected on the day's events. In just 9 minutes and 14 seconds, he had transformed how the faculty and board saw him, not through arguments or credentials alone, but by showing them what was possible when passion and innovation met solid scientific principles. The real work was just beginning. Changing minds was only the first step. Changing the educational experience for students like Tanya would be the true measure of his success. But for the first time since arriving at Westbrook, he felt the wind at his back rather than in his face. The doubts and whispers hadn't disappeared entirely. He could still feel Howard Miller's skeptical gaze following him across the room. But they had been replaced by something more powerful: curiosity and possibility. As he carried the last of his equipment to his car, Dr. Reynolds smiled to himself. Sometimes the most effective response to those who belittle you isn't a direct confrontation, but simply showing them, through undeniable results, just how wrong they were to underestimate you in the first place. The weeks following Dr. Reynolds's demonstration saw a remarkable shift in the atmosphere at Westbrook High. Word had spread quickly among the students about the new physics teacher who could make science look like magic while explaining exactly why it wasn't. His AP physics classes, once viewed as necessary evils on the path to college applications, had become the talk of the school. On this particular Monday morning, Dr. Reynolds arrived earlier than usual to prepare for a special lab session. As he unlocked his classroom door, he was surprised to find Principal Chen waiting in the hallway. "Good morning," she greeted him with an expression that seemed both pleased and concerned. "Do you have a moment to talk before classes begin?" "Of course," he replied, gesturing her into the room. "Is everything all right?" She waited until he had closed the door behind them. "Yes and no. First, the good news. The school board unanimously approved your request for updated lab equipment. Robert Blackwell personally advocated for increasing the budget allocation." Dr. Reynolds smiled. "That's wonderful. The students will benefit tremendously from modern equipment." "Indeed," she agreed. Now for the complicated part. Your popularity has caused some ripples. Ripples, he repeated, setting down his briefcase. Principal. Chen sighed. Several parents have contacted the school requesting that their children be transferred into your physics classes. We've never had a waiting list for AP Physics before. I see. And that's a problem? It becomes one when those same parents begin questioning why other science classes aren't using similar teaching methods. She gave him a meaningful look. Dr. Miller is feeling rather undermined. Several of his advanced chemistry students have asked why they can't do the kind of hands-on demonstrations they've heard about from friends in your classes. Dr. Reynolds nodded slowly, understanding the delicate situation. I'd be happy to share my approach with Dr. Miller or any other teacher interested in adapting it. That's generous, but... She hesitated. Howard has been department head for 12 years. Change doesn't come easily to him, and he's particularly resistant to what he perceives as outside pressure. I understand territorial concerns, Dr. Reynolds said diplomatically. Perhaps if the suggestion came from within the department rather than from administration. That might work, Principal Chen agreed. There's one more thing. Several parents from the board's diversity committee have specifically mentioned how important it is for their children to see a black teacher excelling in advanced sciences. They're requesting you speak at the next community forum about educational equity. Dr. Reynolds felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. Throughout his career, he had navigated the complex reality of being both a physicist and a black man in a field where few looked like him. He was proud to serve as a role model, but wary of being reduced to only that aspect of his identity. I'm happy to speak about educational equity, he said carefully. But I'd prefer to focus on accessible teaching methods rather than my personal background. Effective science eduk. Hashin benefits all students regardless of demographics. Principal Chen nodded with understanding. I'll convey that to the committee, and I should warn you, you've become something of a celebrity among the students. I overheard some of them calling you the science wizard in the hallway last week. He laughed. As long as they understand that what looks like magic is actually rigorous science, I can live with the nickname. After Principal Chen left, Dr. Reynolds finished setting up for his morning classes. The first bell had just rung when there was a knock at his door. He opened it to find Howard Miller standing stiffly in the hallway. Good morning, Howard, Dr. Reynolds greeted him pleasantly. What can I do for you? I'll be direct, Miller said, adjusting his glasses. Your methods are causing disruption in my department. Students are making comparisons that undermine the authority of teachers who use traditional approaches. Dr. Reynolds took a deep breath. I understand your concern, but I'm not responsible for how students interpret different teaching styles. Every teacher has their own approach. Your approach involves flashy demonstrations that have no place in serious academic instruction. Miller countered, his voice tight. Science isn't about entertainment. No, it's about understanding, Dr. Reynolds replied calmly. And students understand better when they're engaged. The demonstrations illustrate complex concepts in tangible ways. Miller's expression hardened. The school board may be impressed by your light shows, but I've been teaching science for 30 years. These fads come and go. When your students fail their AP exams because they spent more time playing with LEDs than learning proper formulas, the board won't be so enthusiastic. Before Dr. Reynolds could respond, students began filing into the classroom. Miller gave him one last disapproving look before walking away. Throughout the morning, Dr. Reynolds found himself reflecting on Miller's words. The department head's criticism wasn't entirely baseless. Flashy demonstrations without substantive content would indeed be problematic. But Miller had missed the fundamental purpose of the interactive approach, to make abstract concepts concrete and memorable. During his lunch period, Dr. Reynolds visited the faculty lounge to find Patricia Winters eating alone at a corner table. Their relationship had improved somewhat since his demonstration, evolving from outright skepticism to cautious professional respect. May I join you? He asked. She nodded, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Howard seems upset today, she commented as he sat down. I assume it involves you somehow. Dr. Reynolds smiled wryly. He's concerned my teaching methods are undermining departmental cohesion. Are you surprised? Patricia asked, setting down her fork. You arrived 3 weeks ago and have already secured additional funding, gained the board's favor, and become the most requested teacher in the science department. Howard has worked here for almost 2 decades building his reputation. I'm not trying to compete with anyone, Dr. Reynolds explained. I simply want to teach effectively. Patricia studied him for a moment. You really don't see it, do you? This isn't just about teaching methods. It's about change. And change threatens people who've built their identities around doing things a certain way. Dr. Reynolds considered her words. What would you suggest? Include him, she said simply. Howard feels bypassed. You went straight to the board with your ideas instead of working through departmental channels. That's not how things have traditionally been done here. I was invited to demonstrate for the board, Dr. Reynolds pointed out. I didn't seek that opportunity. True, Patricia acknowledged. But since then, you've continued operating independently. The science department typically functions as a unit, with Howard at the helm. You're acting like a separate entity. Her assessment was fair. In his eagerness to implement his vision, he hadn't paid enough attention to the existing departmental dynamics. Thank you for the insight, he said sincerely. I'll try to be more collaborative moving forward. Patricia looked surprised by his receptiveness. That's refreshing. Most people get defensive when criticized. I'm a scientist, he replied with a smile. Data is valuable, even when it's uncomfortable. That afternoon, Dr. Reynolds had just finished his final class when Tanya, the student who had approached him at the reception, lingered after the bell. Dr. Reynolds, she said hesitantly, I've been thinking about the group projects you mentioned. Would it be possible to start one early? A few of us were talking and we have some ideas we'd like to explore. What kind of ideas? He asked, intrigued. Well, she said, gaining confidence, you showed us how electromagnetic fields can create light patterns. We were wondering if the same principles could be applied to sound waves. Could we build something that converts sound into visual patterns? Dr. Reynolds felt a surge of pride 3 weeks into the semester, and his students were already making creative connections between different physical phenomena. That's an excellent question, he said. What you're describing is essentially a spectral analyzer, though with a more intuitive visual output. It's absolutely possible, and I'd be happy to help you explore it. Tanya's face lit up. Really? We weren't sure if it was too complicated. It's challenging but achievable, he assured her. Who else is interested in this project? Well, there's me, Louise from 4th period, and she hesitated briefly. Allison Morgan. Dr. Reynolds raised an eyebrow in surprise. Allison Morgan was the daughter of James Morgan, one of the wealthiest parents in the district and a vocal critic of educational reforms. She was also one of the students who had initially seemed most skeptical of his teaching methods. Interesting. Group, he commented. When would you like to start? Could we meet after school tomorrow? Tanya asked eagerly. We've already started researching online, but we need guidance on the technical aspects. Tomorrow works, Dr. Reynolds agreed. Bring your research and we'll develop a project plan together. After Tanya left, Dr. Reynolds found himself smiling. This was exactly the kind of student engagement he had hoped to foster, curiosity-driven, collaborative, and crossing social boundaries that might otherwise remain intact. His thoughts were interrupted by another knock at his door. He opened it to find Robert Blackwell, the silver-haired school board president, standing in the hallway. Dr. Reynolds, Blackwell greeted him warmly. Got a minute? I was in the building for a meeting and thought I'd stop by. Of course. Dr. Reynolds welcomed him in. What can I do for you? Blackwell glanced around the classroom with approval. I wanted to let you know personally that the equipment you requested has been ordered. Should arrive within 2 weeks. That's excellent news, Dr. Reynolds replied. The students will benefit tremendously. I've no doubt, Blackwell agreed. But that's not the only reason I stopped by. Word of your teaching methods has spread beyond Westbrook. The district superintendent attended our last board meeting and was quite impressed by the reports. Dr. Reynolds nodded cautiously, unsure where this was heading. He's proposed implementing similar approaches district-wide, Blackwell continued. We'd like you to head a committee to develop guidelines for interactive science instruction across all our schools. The offer was flattering, but complicated. Dr. Reynolds had come to Westbrook to teach students, not to navigate administrative politics. Additionally, he suspected such an appointment would further strain his relationship with Howard Miller. I'm honored by the consideration, he said carefully. But I've only been here a few weeks. There are teachers with far more experience in this district who might be better suited to lead such an initiative. Blackwell waved away his concern. Experience in the district isn't what we need. We need fresh perspectives and proven methods. Your results speak for themselves. Even so, Dr. Reynolds persisted. I believe this kind of initiative would be more successful with broad departmental support. Perhaps a co-chair arrangement with someone like Dr. Miller would combine innovation with institutional knowledge. Blackwell looked surprised, then thoughtful. That's not what I expected you to suggest, given the reception you initially received from some department members. Dr. Reynolds smiled. Educational change isn't about individual recognition. It's about creating systems that benefit students. That requires collaboration, even with those who might initially resist new approaches. The board president studied him with newfound respect. You know, when we hired you, we were impressed by your credentials. Now I'm even more impressed by your wisdom. Let me discuss your suggestion with the superintendent. After Blackwell left, Dr. Reynolds sat at his desk, reflecting on the day's conversations. The situation was more complex than he had initially realized. His success was creating both opportunities and tensions that extended beyond his classroom. As he gathered his materials to leave, he noticed Howard Miller watching him through the classroom window. Instead of pretending not to see him, Dr. Reynolds motioned for him to come in. Miller entered reluctantly. I saw Blackwell leaving. More special treatment? Actually, Dr. Reynolds replied. He offered me a position heading a district-wide committee on interactive science instruction. I suggested you and I co-chair it instead. Miller's expression shifted from suspicion to confusion. Why would you do that? Because you have institutional knowledge I lack, Dr. Reynolds explained honestly. And because Sciveness in the science department doesn't serve our students. The department head stared at him for a long moment. You're serious? Completely. We have different approaches but the same goal, quality science education. I believe we can learn from each other. Miller seemed at a loss for words. Finally, he said, I'll consider it, if the offer materializes. It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was an opening. Dr. Reynolds would take it. As he drove home that evening, he thought about how quickly things had changed. 3 weeks ago, he had been the outsider, belittled and underestimated by colleagues who saw only his race, not his capabilities. Now, he had the board's support, student enthusiasm, and a potential platform to influence education beyond his own classroom. The key moment hadn't been his credentials or even his teaching philosophy. It had been those 9 minutes and 14 seconds when he showed, rather than told, what was possible. Actions had spoken louder than any words could have. At home, he shared the day's events with his wife, Lisa, as they prepared dinner together. So now you're turning down leadership positions to collaborate with the man who tried to undermine you? She asked, raising an eyebrow. That's either very generous or very strategic. Dr. Reynolds smiled. Maybe both. Real change doesn't come from replacing one authority figure with another. It comes from transforming how people think about what's possible. Lisa studied her husband with proud eyes. You know, when you decided to leave the NSF, I worried you might regret giving up research for teaching. But I've never seen you more fulfilled than these past few weeks. That's because this is the most important research I've ever done, he replied. We're not just studying physical phenomena. We're studying how to unlock human potential. As they sat down to dinner with their daughters, his phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Tanya, sharing an initial design concept for the sound visualization project. Despite the late hour, She and her unlikely team had already begun collaborating. Dr. Reynolds showed the email to his family, his face glowing with pride. "This is why I teach," he said simply. "This moment right here." His older daughter, who had questioned his career change, nodded with new understanding. "I get it now, Dad. You're not just teaching physics, you're changing lives." "I'm trying," he acknowledged. "But the students are doing the real work. All I'm doing is showing them what's possible when they believe in themselves." As he looked at Tanya's enthusiastic email, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this point. The countless times he had been underestimated, the doors that had been harder for him to open than for his peers, the persistent need to prove himself again and again. Those challenges had forged in him a determination that now fueled his teaching, a deep conviction that no student should be limited by others' perceptions of what they could achieve. Every time someone had belittled him, they had unknowingly strengthened his resolve to create a different experience for the next generation. 9 minutes and 14 seconds had changed how Westbrook saw him. But the real transformation was just beginning, not just for him but for every student who would discover their potential in his classroom. As winter gave way to spring, Westbrook High School had transformed in ways few could have predicted. When Dr. Reynolds first arrived, the science wing, once the quietest section of the building after hours, now hummed with activity well into the afternoon, as students worked on projects that blended physics principles with real-world applications. This particular Thursday afternoon, Dr. Reynolds supervised 3 different student groups spread throughout his classroom. In one corner, Tanya and her team had progressed far beyond their initial sound visualization concept, creating a sophisticated system that translated music into intricate light patterns while simultaneously displaying the mathematical formulas governing the transformations. "Dr. Reynolds," Tanya called, waving him over. "We fixed the frequency response issue. Look at how it handles bass notes now." He joined their group as Luis played a deep bass tone on his phone. The display erupted, with concentric rings of blue light that pulsed in perfect sync with the sound. "Excellent work," Dr. Reynolds praised them. "How did you solve the resonance problem?" "We modified the sensor array," Allison explained, pointing to a component they had redesigned. "Instead of a single microphone, we created this distributed array that captures different frequency ranges separately before recombining them in the processor." Dr. Reynolds nodded approvingly. "Creative solution. You're thinking like engineers now, not just physics students." Across the room, another group was refining a small-scale maglev system that demonstrated principles of electromagnetic suspension. A third team huddled around a computer, debugging code for a simulation of gravitational waves. The door opened and Principal Chen entered with a visitor, a well-dressed woman carrying a notebook. "Dr. Reynolds," Principal Chen called. "Do you have a moment? This is Ms. Rivera from the State Education Department. She's here to observe some of our innovative programs." "Of course," he replied, excusing himself from Tanya's group. "Welcome to AP Physics, Ms. Rivera. You've caught us during our project development session." Ms. Rivera's eyes widened as she took in the activity around the room. "This is not what I expected from a high school physics class. Dr. Reynolds has implemented a project-based learning approach that has dramatically increased student engagement," Principal Chen explained proudly. "Our AP Physics enrollment has doubled for next year, including many students who previously showed no interest in advanced sciences." "Impressive," Ms. Rivera noted, jotting something in her notebook. "And these projects are aligned with state standards?" "Every project addresses multiple standards," Dr. Reynolds confirmed. "But more importantly, they build connections between theoretical concepts and practical applications. Students aren't just memorizing formulas, they're using them to create something meaningful." Ms. Rivera moved through the room, stopping to speak with each student group. Dr. Reynolds watched with satisfaction as his students confidently explained complex scientific principles without hesitation or reference to notes. They had taken ownership of their learning in ways that transcended traditional assessment measures. When Ms. Rivera returned to where Dr. Reynolds and Principal Chen waited, her expression was thoughtful. "The State Department has been pushing for more engaging STEM education for years, but we've seen limited implementation success. What you've achieved here in a single semester is remarkable. Thank you, Dr. Reynolds replied. But the credit belongs to the students. Given the right environment and expectations, young people will consistently exceed what we think they're capable of. The environment doesn't create itself, Ms. Rivera observed shrewdly. I understand there was some initial resistance to your methods. Dr. Reynolds exchanged a glance with Principal Chen. Change often meets resistance. That's natural. What matters is finding common ground and moving forward together. After Ms. Rivera left promising to include Westbrook in an upcoming report on educational innovation, Principal Chen stayed behind. You were diplomatic about the initial resistance, she noted with a small smile. Especially considering what you faced when you first arrived, Dr. Reynolds shrugged. The past is useful only for what it teaches us, not for holding grudges. Speaking of the past and present, Principal Chen said, the district committee you and Dr. Miller are co-chairing has generated quite a buzz. Several neighboring districts have requested to send observers to your next meeting. The committee had evolved from the initial proposal into a collaborative effort that brought together innovative and traditional teaching approaches. To Dr. Reynolds' surprise, Howard Miller had proven to be a valuable partner once his expertise was acknowledged and respected. Dr. Miller deserves much of the credit, Dr. Reynolds said honestly. His insight into curriculum integration has been invaluable. Principal Chen looked pleased. You two have become quite the effective team, not something I would have predicted 3 months ago. As the final bell rang and students began packing up their projects, Dr. Reynolds reminded them of the upcoming Science Showcase. Remember, next Friday evening is your opportunity to present your work to the community, he announced. Parents, board members, and local business leaders will all be attending. Make sure your demonstrations are polished and your explanations are clear. Tanya lingered after the others had left. Dr. Reynolds, our team was wondering if we could add something to our presentation for the showcase. What did you have in mind? He asked. We want to acknowledge how your teaching changed our perspective on physics, she explained, especially for students like me who never thought science was something we could excel in. Dr. Reynolds felt a familiar tightness in his throat. That's very kind, but the showcase should focus on your achievements, not mine. But that's just it, Tanya insisted. Our achievements are connected to your belief in us. Before you came, no one expected students like me to create projects like this. She gestured to their sound visualization system. You showed us what was possible. He considered her words carefully. I appreciate the sentiment, Tanya. How about this? Focus your presentation on what you've learned and created, but you're welcome to briefly mention how different teaching approaches can open new pathways for students. She nodded, satisfied with the compromise. One more thing. I got my acceptance letter from MIT yesterday, with a full scholarship. Dr. Reynolds broke into a wide smile. Tanya, that's wonderful news. Congratulations. I wouldn't have even applied without your encouragement, she admitted. My counselor still thought it was a long shot, but you convinced me to try anyway. You earned that acceptance through your own hard work and brilliance, he reminded her. All I did was help you see what was already there. After Tanya left, Dr. Reynolds sat at his desk reflecting on the journey of the past semester. The transformation hadn't been just in how others perceived him, but in how students like Tanya had come to perceive themselves and their capabilities. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Howard Miller stood in the doorway, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. Do you have a minute? Miller asked. Of course, Dr. Reynolds replied, gesturing to a chair. What's on your mind? Miller sat down stiffly. I've been reviewing the preliminary AP practice exam results. Your student scores are exceptional, particularly in the free response sections that test conceptual understanding. That's encouraging, Dr. Reynolds said, though the real test is still a month away. Based on these results, I'd project a pass rate over 90% with most achieving 4s and 5s, Miller continued. That would be unprecedented for Westbrook. Dr. Reynolds waited, sensing there was more to this conversation than test scores. Miller adjusted his glasses nervously. I owe you an apology. When you arrived, I made assumptions. I questioned your methods, your qualifications, even your commitment to rigorous science education. You were protecting what you had built. Dr. Reynolds replied evenly. I understand. That impulse? No. Miller shook his head. Let's be honest. My resistance wasn't just about teaching methods. I saw a young black physicist with an MIT degree and immediately looked for reasons why you didn't belong here. That wasn't about protecting educational standards. It was about protecting my own sense of superiority. The frank admission surprised Dr. Reynolds. I appreciate your honesty, Howard. That can't have been easy to say. It wasn't, Miller acknowledged. But watching what you've accomplished this semester, not just with the top students but with kids who previously struggled in science, has forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my own biases. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I've taught chemistry for 30 years using the same approaches I was taught with. I got good results with motivated students and wrote off the others as not science material. You've shown that with the right approach, nearly any student can engage meaningfully with complex scientific concepts. Different approaches reach different learners, Dr. Reynolds said. Traditional methods still have value for certain students and contexts. That's why our committee work has focused on integration rather than replacement. Miller nodded. That's been a revelation for me as well, that innovation doesn't have to threaten tradition. They can enhance each other. He straightened in his chair. Which brings me to the reason for my visit. I'm retiring at the end of this school year. I didn't know that, Dr. Reynolds said, surprised. Westbrook will lose a wealth of experience. 30 years is enough, Miller replied with a small smile. And it's time for new leadership in the science department. I've recommended to Principal Chen that you be appointed as the new department head. Dr. Reynolds blinked in astonishment. Howard, I'm honored, but I've been here less than a year. There are other teachers with far more seniority. Seniority isn't the same as vision, Miller countered. The department needs someone who can bridge traditional and innovative approaches, someone who has demonstrated both scientific excellence and the ability to inspire students across different backgrounds and ability levels. He gave a self-deprecating shrug. Besides, the rest of the department already looks to you for leadership, whether you hold the title or not. Before Dr. Reynolds could respond, they were interrupted by another knock. Patricia Winters entered, carrying a stack of papers. Sorry to interrupt, she said, taking in the scene. I can come back later. No need, Miller replied, standing up. I've said what I came to say. Think about my recommendation, Dr. Reynolds. The future of science education at Westbrook could depend on it. After Miller left, Patricia raised an eyebrow. That looked serious. Howard just informed me he's retiring and has recommended me as his replacement as department head, Dr. Reynolds explained, still processing the conversation. Patricia didn't look surprised. I suspected as much. The real question is whether you'll accept. I came here to teach students, not manage departmental politics, he replied honestly. Sometimes the greatest impact comes from changing systems, not just individual classrooms, Patricia pointed out. As department head, you could support other teachers in adapting your methods, influence curriculum decisions, and advocate for resources. She set down the papers she was carrying. Which brings me to why I'm here. These are the preliminary plans for redesigning the science wing over the summer. The board approved the budget yesterday, based largely on the success of your program and the anticipated growth in science enrollment. Dr. Reynolds examined the plans with interest. This is extensive. New lab spaces, updated equipment, flexible learning areas. The redesign incorporates many of the ideas you've proposed in our committee meetings, Patricia explained. As department head, you'd oversee the implementation. He looked up at her with new understanding. You already knew about Howard's recommendation. She nodded. He discussed it with several of us last week. The department is unanimously supportive. Even you? He asked with a hint of surprise. Their professional relationship had improved dramatically, but Patricia had been one of his most skeptical colleagues initially. Especially me, she admitted. I was wrong about you, Thomas. I let preconceptions cloud my judgment. Watching you teach, seeing how you connect with students who were falling through the cracks in our traditional system, has changed how I think about science education. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Robert Blackwell and several other board members who had come to preview the science showcase projects. Dr. Reynolds, Blackwell greeted him enthusiastically. We couldn't wait until next week to see what your students have been creating. I've been telling everyone about the transformation happening in your classroom. As Dr. Reynolds gave the board members a tour of the student projects, explaining the scientific principles behind each one, he noticed how differently they interacted with him compared to his first day at Westbrook. Where there had once been skepticism and condescension, there was now respect and genuine interest. The evening of the science showcase arrived with great anticipation. The school gymnasium had been transformed into an exhibition hall with student projects from all science classes displayed prominently. Dr. Reynolds's AP Physics students occupied the center section, their interactive demonstrations drawing the largest crowds. Tanya's team had set up their sound visualization system on a raised platform, with speakers that filled the room with music, while their display created corresponding light patterns on a large screen. They had added an educational component that explained the mathematical relationships between sound waves and visual patterns, making complex physics accessible to visitors of all ages. Principal Chen found Dr. Reynolds as he moved between student presentations, offering encouragement and fielding questions from impressed parents. "This is beyond what I imagined when we hired you," she said, gesturing to the bustling gymnasium. "Look at the engagement, not just from students but from the community." He nodded, watching as Tanya confidently explained wave mechanics to a group of business leaders. They just needed the opportunity to shine. "It's more than opportunity," Principal Chen insisted. "It's belief. You didn't just teach them physics, you showed them they belonged in the world of science, particularly for students who never saw themselves represented in these fields before." As the evening progressed, Dr. Reynolds found himself approached by parents who had initially been among his most vocal critics. James Morgan, Allison's father and a prominent community figure, shook his hand with genuine respect. "My daughter has never been this excited about a school project," Morgan admitted. "She's talking about majoring in engineering now, something I never would have expected. Whatever you're doing in that classroom, it's working." Near the end of the showcase, Principal Chen called for everyone's attention. "Before we conclude this evening, the school board has a special announcement." Robert Blackwell stepped forward. 3 months ago, Westbrook High School embarked on a new approach to science education that has exceeded all expectations. The projects you've seen tonight represent not just student achievement, but a vision of what's possible when we combine rigorous academics with engaging, hands-on learning. He gestured to Dr. Reynolds. "The architect of this transformation has agreed to expand his role next year as science department head, but we're taking this success even further. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce the creation of the Westbrook Science Innovation Program, which will implement these teaching methods across all grade levels in our district." The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. Dr. Reynolds felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in what his students had accomplished, satisfaction at the validation of his methods, and a sense of responsibility for the expanded role he was taking on. As the crowd began to disperse, Tanya approached. With her parents, "Dr. Reynolds," her father said, extending his hand, "we wanted to thank you personally. When Tanya told us she was applying to MIT, we thought she was setting herself up for disappointment. Now she's going with a full scholarship. Your daughter earned that scholarship through her own brilliance and determination," Dr. Reynolds replied. "I just helped her see what was possible." "You did more than that," Tanya's mother said softly. "You changed how she sees herself. Before your class, she didn't believe she belonged in advanced science courses. Now she's planning a career in physics research." After they left, Dr. Reynolds found himself alone in the gymnasium, surrounded by the projects his students had created. He thought back to his first day at Westbrook, the doubtful glances, the dismissive comments, the immediate assumption that he didn't belong. In 9 minutes and 14 seconds, he had begun to change those perceptions. But the real transformation had taken months of consistent work, building relationships, proving through results rather than words that his approach had merit. As he packed up the last of the demonstration equipment, Howard Miller appeared beside him. "Quite a success," Miller observed, looking around at the exhibition space. "You've accomplished in one semester what I couldn't do in 30 years. "That's not true," Dr. Reynolds countered. "You built a foundation of academic excellence that made this possible. I just added a different approach to engaging students." Miller shook his head with a rueful smile. "You're gracious, but we both know the truth. I was so focused on maintaining what I knew that I resisted anything new. It took seeing your results, seeing students like Tanya Thompson transform from struggling to exceptional, to make me recognize what I'd been missing." He extended his hand. "The department will be in good hands with you. Don't make my mistake. Stay open to the next innovation, even if it challenges what you believe works." As Dr. Reynolds drove home that night, he reflected on the journey from that first faculty meeting to the triumphant showcase. The belittling comments, the skeptical glances, the assumptions about his qualifications, all had been answered not through confrontation, but through consistent excellence and measurable results. When he arrived home, his wife was waiting up for him. "How was the showcase?" she asked. "Transformative," he replied with a tired smile. "Not just for the students, but for the entire school community." "I'm so proud of you," Lisa said, embracing him. "When you decided to leave research for teaching, I knew you were following your passion, but I never imagined the impact you would have." Dr. Reynolds thought of Tanya and the other students who had discovered capabilities they never knew they possessed. "Teaching isn't just about transferring knowledge," he said. "It's about transforming lives, including my own." As he prepared for bed, his phone buzzed with a text message from Tanya. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. You changed everything." He smiled as he set down the phone. 3 months ago, they had belittled the black teacher, who dared to bring new methods to their traditional school. 9 minutes and 14 seconds had begun to change their perception. But the real transformation had come through consistent excellence, measurable results, and the undeniable success of students who had previously been written off. In the face of doubt and dismissal, he had responded not with anger or defensiveness, but with brilliance and determination. And in doing so, he had changed not just how others saw him, but how a generation of students saw themselves and their own potential. That, he reflected as he drifted off to sleep, was the most powerful demonstration of all.